I am Charles. I'm the Mac nerd here at Enable, and here is my Twitter handle and my email address. Feel free to get in touch with me through either of those and let me know if you have any feedback or questions after the webinar is over, or just want to reach out and tell me how awesome I am. Follow me on Twitter, email me, etc., etc. Today is the first day that I've been doing this particular webinar, so there's still some rough edges to work out. There will be future opportunities for watching and recording the session. So today, as I said, things are a little rough around the edges, and looks like we've got a few people coming in still, so that's just fine. First things first, now that you know me, I would like to get to know you. So a few questions to ask before we get started. The first is, we're going to be talking about scripting today. So what is your level of experience with shell scripting, bash scripting, however you want to call it? It doesn't matter what platform, whether it's Mac, Linux, Unix, internet connected toaster. If you can script it, what is your experience with that? So it looks like the bulk of the people that are on the call are automation and scripting users, but not necessarily ones who write their own. And at least one of you is a artificial intelligence passing as human, which is great. Always love that. Next is, since we'll be talking about Macs, what is your level of experience with managing Macs? Have you been doing it for a while, just getting started, or are you like me and you still have a binder full of floppy disks installers for Mac Plus and SE back in the day? Most of you have at least a few years experience with managing Macs. And again, there's a couple of veterans in the audience as far as dealing with Apple hardware. So one last question for you, and this is more of a demographics question for me. I just really want to know, how many Macs do you currently have in your fleet that you're managing, presumably with RMM, but not necessarily. And once again, just about everyone has weighed in, and it looks like most of the audience is in the 10 to 50 Macs range, and that's great. If you are in the greater than 100 range, also great, and we should have some interesting content for you, even if you're just getting started or only have a few. Go ahead and close that down and get started on our agenda. So what are we going to be talking about today? We'll start with a little bit of, we'll start with the topic of scripting on the Mac. Generally, the reason to do it is to save yourself some time with your daily admin tasks, leading up to building automated configurations and doing installs. That way, we'll start with a little history and background first, what your options are for the different scripting languages, and then some hands-on for writing shell scripts. Then we can get into making those scripts work on your managed Macs, customizing them for your environment, deploying them with RMM, that sort of thing. And we'll build on that to build and change some configurations, install apps across your Macs, and build automations that will hopefully react to things like failures and error modes. So on to, in the beginning, there was AppleScript. So initially, the Mac did not have a command line or any kind of a built-in programming environment like DOS or your mainframes and mini computers back in the day. So Apple eventually developed its own scripting language to make up for that. It's been around for almost 30 years now and gone through a number of evolutions and iterations, including pivoting to an open architecture, which is, at least by Apple's definition of open. So you may see components referred to as OSA, or Open Scripting Architecture, or OSAX, or Open Scripting Architecture Extensions, and that's referring to AppleScript in modern macOS. The main advantage that AppleScript had, at least back in those days, and even now really, is that it's not a bunch of obfuscated DOS commands sitting in a batch file, but more like a natural language. And if you read it aloud, it sounds almost like something that you would tell Siri or Alexa to do. So tell application Microsoft Word, create new document, and ran that. The application called Microsoft Word on my Mac here would create a new document, document one, and open up a window for me to edit it. So very human readable, very accessible, and having hooks into the operating system being made by Apple, you can even write full-fledged applications in it. It's powerful enough. The standard GUI libraries in there. You can link in Objective-C and create your own components. You can use the same tool chain you might use for modern apps, which is Xcode. The downside of being all pretty inflexible and human readable is that the language is very slow. So resources on your Mac can be dedicated to fairly inefficient AppleScript calls and grind the whole machine to a halt. So if you're interested in more of the history and all the fiddly bits around AppleScript, highly recommend macOSautomation.com. It's a website run by Sal Sagoyan, who is the head of all things automation at Apple for about 25 years. So he knows all there is to know about AppleScript. Literally wrote the book. And if you want to dive deeper into actually developing for AppleScript, you can use some free tools from Apple, Xcode, Script Editor, Automator. Xcode is the development environment of choice for Mac and iOS apps. It's really a full integrated development environment, but it's also kind of a big hammer for a small nail if you're just building an automation in AppleScript. The free script editor from Apple is fairly bare bones as far as what it contains, and there's also Automator, which is a little bit more friendly. Lets you record actions that you want to happen, and open this folder, put this file in, rename this, that kind of thing. Sort of a drag and drop interface. It's really nice to get started and to build things that you can basically just double click on and it runs. But again, it's sort of limited in its scope as far as being able to customize and add parameters and things to your scripts. Then if you're going to go with a third-party app, there is Script Debugger, which is sort of the best in class as far as writing and working in AppleScript. It has most of your standard IDE features. It's free for the version that has probably about 90 or 95% of the features turned on. And if you really want to go whole hog and turn all of the various integrations and libraries on, it's $99 for the full version. But we're not going to be talking about AppleScript today. I can do a demonstration for you if we have time at the end, if anybody has interest in that. But today we're going to be talking about more modern operating system, or more modern, the more modern version of macOS, even though Bash itself is as old or older than AppleScript. When OS 10, and it's 10, not X, came along, Apple brought a command line to the Macs. So since we're doing an overview of scripting today, one of the best ways to get started is to just learn the command line. So if you can run the commands and get the results that you want, you can package up those commands into a file and run that same set of commands, that script, that batch, anytime you like. And with OS 10, the Mac finally has such a command line, or at least has for the last, what are we at, 15 years, something like that. Gets all the goodies that comes along with it. OS 10 is built up on top, or macOS now is built on top of BSD derived Unix called Darwin. And if you scratch a little the surface, the heritage of BSD shows through. If you're familiar with Linux, many of the tools and commands that you find there will be interchangeable. However, Linux is not Unix, so don't assume everything you work that works on Linux will work 100% the same between the two. Even in the same shell environment, even with the same commands, the syntax might be slightly different, or the version between the two might be different. So always double check to make sure that the scripts that you are modifying online are either made to work for a Mac or have take some time to run through it and make sure that it does what it says on the tin. So with that, we have a variety of different shell options to build our scripts in. When I talk about shell scripting, I'll also go back and forth between referring to it as bash scripting. So bash was the default shell environment for many years, and now Apple has recently made ZSH the new default shell. So if you're going to be trying to be forward-looking, then you may want to have a look at this article from scriptingos10.com about moving your scripts from bash or sh to be compatible with ZSH. Mostly the syntax and everything is the same. ZSH actually adds a lot of additional functions, things like working with variables as arrays as opposed to just flat lists. But bash isn't gone anywhere yet. There's a lot under the hood that is still relying on that bash syntax to be unchanged. And really, if you want to be 100% backward compatible, sh isn't going anywhere either. So it's still there. And for backward compatibility, your script should be built for sh. So when you're writing a shell script, you need to basically just make a text file. So any text editor in general will do. You're making ASCII text, and that includes things that are on the command line. I don't want to take sides in the sort of perpetual flame war between Vi and Emacs or VI. Make no comment there, except to say all of these three tools are pre-installed, and I generally use Nano, so don't fight me. TextEdit is also pre-installed. It's fine. It is a free text editor, hence the name. Just beware that it has a tendency to make RTF, rich text format files with the formatting built in. And it will sometimes convert your plain text files into RTF, and then when you go to run them as a script, it will be unintelligible garbage. So again, Xcode is here, and you can get that from Apple's developer website. Again, it's overkill unless you're really building some, a really big automation project or integrating things with Objective-C objects, additional libraries, that sort of thing. As far as third-party solutions go, there's a huge number of text editors that will suffice. A lot of Windows admins will already use VS Code, so you'll be familiar with that from Microsoft. Web developers will probably know Atom and a few others like that for integrating with GitHub. Personally, I prefer BBEdit, which is partly out of habit and familiarity. It's been around for about 25 years, and I've been using some version of BBEdit for most of that time. It's sort of like Emacs, just in a GUI environment in the sense that it keeps growing and adding more features and adding more functionality to the point that it's almost like an operating system on its own. And really, what other text editor do you know of that has its own merchandise? Yeah, you can buy t-shirts and hats and things from barebones.com. And it also comes with a free version that you can use as long as you like. You get 30 days to use the full feature set, but then after that, you can still use it for free with just sort of the edge case advanced features turned off. So this is BBEdit, and generally you will see window like this, just basically a big plain text editing window. But this I've opened up so that you can see. I've turned the font size really big so people can see without having to squint, and I've got a bunch of documents open here on the left-hand side. So that's it. It's pretty much the interface for BBEdit. And you can see here is the context coloring for shell file .sh. The beginning of my shell script is this little special blob here called the shebang. So it's a pound sign and an exclamation mark. The exclamation mark is referred to as the bang. So, and then the path to the shell that the script is intended to run in. The lines that begin with the pound sign are comments. And generally what I will do when I'm writing something new is I'll write my sort of flow chart sort of breakdown in pseudocode in the comments. So I'll write something like, I need to create a directory, and then I'm going to move all the files into that directory, and then I'm going to do the same thing with, other things, and so on. And then after I have an idea of where the logic flows, I'll go in and actually fill in the commands that make that happen. So in this case, I'm making a directory, so I'm using the mkdir command, make directory, and BBEdit has kindly highlighted that in blue. So I know that all of these commands that are in blue are legit commands. And if I make a mistake, I can real easily see where my mistake is. And the white text is just generic strings and things like that. So if you've ever used a programming editor that has context coloring, you'll see this is fairly familiar to you. So what am I doing here in this this particular script? Let me get to my Finder window here. So here is my Finder window, and what I'm using as an example in this script is a way to sort of organize the files that I have in this folder. This might be your desktop folder, it might be your downloads folder, it might just be where you store files before they're archived, whatever. It just ends up being full of junk. And this is, a reasonable amount. It's only on 82 items, but it could be thousands of files. And I've definitely seen people's desktops where it's been cluttered up with literally several hundred screenshots and various downloaded files and whatnot. So if I wanted to see which files I have in here, I can sort them by the date modified, so the most recent ones, or the biggest ones, or what kind of file they are. And so if I wanted to maybe organize them a little bit, I'll create a new folder and call this PNGs, and I'll take and select all the ping files, and oh, I missed one, so I'll have to drag that in there. And then I've got, let's see, I've got a bunch of text files, so I'll create a new folder for text files, and yada, 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 yada. So if I do that, it'll take me a few minutes with, this folder that only has, less than 100 files in it. But if it were a folder with several thousand files, or 100 different kinds of file types that I wanted to organize in this way, it would be easier and I think faster for me to do that on the command line. So for that, I will open up the terminal, and I'm going to cd change directories to that temp folder. And if I just do ls to list the files, so I can see all the different files and file names in here. So if I wanted to show just the PNG files, okay, so there's all the PNGs with that extension. So let's say I wanted to organize these by the file extension or the file type. And so I'm going to maybe make a directory and call it PNG. And then I'm going to move all the star.png files into PNG, and lo and behold, there we go. Okay, so my my Finder window, so suddenly all those PNG files are in there. And I can do the same again. I'll make directory of text, and then I will move all the text files in there. And so there they are. So that's a start. And I can go through and do all of these steps for all the different kinds of files that I have in that folder, to the point where I have a different folder for each of the different file extensions. But again, we're here for automation. So let's have a look at how we can make that go even faster and better for us. So all the commands that I have just typed on the terminal window, are right here listed out in my script. So starting by making a directory, then moving things into that directory, and then because it is case sensitive, I'll move things that have the uppercase version of that extension into that same directory, and then do the same thing with JPEGs, and then do the same thing with TIFFs, only they have either a 3 or 4 letter extension on the end, and I could continue on with text files and so on and so on. And so if I run that, go in here and so sh to run it with the shell, and there we go. So it's trying to find PNG files that don't exist because there aren't any that have that uppercase PNG extension. So now I've got my JPEGs, PNGs, and TIFFs in here. Oh, but I forgot to do text files. Oh, dang. And then what is this? This is a Pixelmator file. And then I have these, the shell files themselves are, so it's kind of helpful, but not, super flexible if I have more than just a few different file types in one place. But if you have a directory that you know what's going to be in there, then you can tailor your script to be just the kinds of things that you will expect to see in that. And as I said before, this is a great way to get started with automation. You're basically recording the steps to do a thing. In this case, you're recording the steps to that you would do on the command line, and then putting them into a shell .sh file. So a shell script will then run all these steps as if you're sitting at the keyboard typing them one by one, which honestly will save you a lot of time if this is the kind of thing that you're doing, or if there's a lot of sort of manual entry of things in your life. But if you want to, for instance, do that same job, but be a little bit more flexible about it, you can add a little bit of intelligence to your script. And so what we'll do, again, we're going to start with the shebang. And I will mention this is not a Bash 101 style class. There's plenty of resources for learning how to do, learning how to work on the command line, working in Bash, and I have a list of a lot of those resources and links in the lab manual, and we'll talk about some of them later on in the presentation. But I'm not going to go through and do line by line each of the different Bash options, but I will show you some of the features that you can build into your own scripts as you're learning. So again, we're starting with the sh command, and then for each file in the current directory. So I'm going to get a list of all the files, which is with star.star, and I'm going to put that list into basically it goes into an array-like structure. And so for each of the items in that list, so for each item, I'm going to call it file name. We're going to try and get the extension that's on the end of the file name. And so this is a for loop, and it will do everything here before the done. And with that file name, I'm going to try and get the extension on the end of it. And so here I'm setting a variable called ext, and the $sign is like your variable expansion or text replacement sort of shortcut here. So the $sign and then the format after it. And this honestly is the kind of thing that I have to look up just about every time I do it, because the options are a little opaque as far as what they translate into. But suffice to say, this is taking that variable of file name and setting everything, getting rid of everything before the first dot. So the extension is just the remainder, which is the everything after that that last dot in the file name. So with that extension set in a variable, what I'll do is check to see if a directory of that name exists. So with that, for that, I use a command called test, and test-d will check to see if a directory exists, and the directory name I'm looking for is, so if this is a list of JPEGs, it would be, the extension would be JPEG, and then I'm looking for a directory called JPEG. So if it exists, but with the exclamation mark before it, that is negates the test here. So if this does not exist, then we're going to make that directory. So if the JPEG directory doesn't exist, we're going to create a directory called JPEG, and then once that directory exists, whether it did before or we've made it, now we're going to move the file that's referenced by file name into the folder that we just created called extension. And to answer the question, Ari, this is not regex. It's it's similar in that it does have regular expression kind of replacement characteristics, but it's specific to Bash, and you can find a reference to it in the Scripting OS 10 website for that. Yeah, regex, regular expressions, is something that I get. Once again, I have to look it up every time because it's a language all to itself. So I'm looking for a list of file names, looking for the extension, and then this should organize my files into folders by extension. So if I have my folder full of files here, and I run my script, now if I list the files, I have just those folders, and in the Finder it looks like this. So now I have all my text files in a text folder, TIFF files in a TIFF folder, and so on. So just a quick example of what you can do with a for loop and some conditionals with ifs and thens. And so that you can follow along at home, your first task is to download and install BBEdit from barebones.com, and that. All right, so the rest of the boot camp is going to be talking about shell scripting. So we're going to be going back and forth between the terminal and BBEdit, and but there's also a plethora of other options already either built in under the hood as provided by Apple or available to install from third parties. So Swift is Apple's newest programming language used for building macOS and iOS apps, and it does have a command line interface that can make make the Mac jump through hoops. There's also Objective-C, which is still hanging around from the Next Step days, and that also has hooks that are available in AppleScript, so you can build a GUI application with Objective-C objects and AppleScript. And then there's untold numbers of third-party and open source languages. We've got Python, Go, Ruby. There's too many to really list on one slide. Oh, and also PowerShell. So yeah, PowerShell. So bad news about these third-party languages that are not necessarily provided by Apple or have been deprecated, whatever, is dependencies. Those dependencies are not necessarily installed by default. Python especially is particularly squirrely about having multiple versions, different branches with different dependencies. It's a bit of a mess to keep straight. But the good news is that things like Python have a virtual environment that you can run your scripts inside of as a sort of as a solution to their own problem with being able to install almost like a containerized version of Python. And either the current version of RMM 3.8, I think, or a near future one is set to bundle Python 3 with its own virtual environment directly with the RMM agent. And so there will be fewer issues if you decide to do your scripting in Python. So you won't have to worry too much about missing components and dependencies and things like that, as long as you stay sort of within the lanes of what the RMM agent is prepared to do. And did I mention PowerShell? Yes, I did mention PowerShell. So if you are a Windows admin, and it sounded like from the polls at the beginning, many of you are at least coming from a Windows background, you may be familiar with PowerShell more so than with Bash. So I am going to show, and it's part of your homework in the lab manual, the way to install PowerShell is through a tool called Homebrew, and the command line for downloading and installing PowerShell through, or sorry, installing Homebrew is a really simple one-line Bash script in and of itself. So it is calling Bash binary to run the results of this curl command, and curl is a command for downloading files from a URL. So this is saying get this URL, this install.sh, and once you've downloaded it, run it through Bash. And when you do that, it will ask you for your admin password. And there are ways to do this installation where it doesn't require sudo access and doesn't require any user interaction. So you can install Homebrew without having to log into the machine directly. So you can do it as a remote install. And if I can find that link again, I'll put it in the chat. Someone was asking about it this morning, and so I dug that up for them. The main reason that you need root access or sudo access is to create some of these folders where normally you would have you'd have to have root access to create folders inside of the user hierarchy. When you do it without sudo access, you have to create your Homebrew folder somewhere where any user can write to it. So it's not, it doesn't follow directly the installer, but all the stuff ends up there anyway. So I've already got Homebrew installed, so I can skip this step. But the next thing I'm going to do is, the way you install things with Homebrew is just the command is brew and then install. And in this example, I'm going to be installing PowerShell. So brew install PowerShell. And once brew is installed, you don't even need sudo access to run it. It's going to check to make sure that I have the latest version of the Homebrew libraries and formulas. And it's going to update the casks because it's Homebrew, so brewing. And since I already have PowerShell installed, I can either reinstall it or I can just run it. And so I'm going to run PowerShell pwsh, and that should launch PowerShell. So if we wanted, we can do, run the help commands with, as with PowerShell on a Windows machine, you should be able to do things like tab completion. So if I hit tab, I can see that it's auto-correcting my case-sensitive get, and I'm going to get, let's get processes. And if I do that, so now it's telling me these are all the processes that are running on the machine, and that's a whole lot of them. As with anything else that you might know from, oh, sorry, it's not quit, it's exit. Most of the commands that you are familiar with that talk to the file system and get information in and out, those will work the same on the Mac as they do on Windows. Anything that's talking directly to the hardware or to the the Windows registry, things like that, those are probably not going to work, and they may not even exist on the in the Mac version. So as your command blitz or whatever. So if you do have some experience with PowerShell, this is a great way to get a jump start on automation. However, it's not installed on most machines. Most Macs are not going to have it installed, and you're going to have to install it in some way yourself. And then also, as far as compatibility goes, you will need to modify your PowerShell scripts to work within the Mac's file system and the various components that are there as opposed to Windows. So now that I have PowerShell installed, what I can do is I have a PS1, just a really simple PowerShell script here. And just like with my bash script, I have the shebang line here. And instead of going to the SH binary, it's going to the PowerShell binary. So this path is now to PowerShell. And the way that I get that is, sorry, GoToWebinar keeps getting in my way. So I'm going to do this. There we go. Okay. To get the path to use for things like this, I can ask the machine which PowerShell it would run. And so here is the binary, here's the path to that binary for PowerShell. So that's where I grabbed that information. And then as before, # means a comment, and pipe is taking the output from this process and inputting it into this process. So I'm getting all of the running processes on the machine, piping that into the sort object, and it takes a couple of arguments. So I'm going to sort by the CPU column and sort it descending, and then with the output from that, I'm going to run the select object and then grab just the first 5 results from this get process. So if all that works the way it is supposed to, I should be able to run that script with pwsh, and the result is the top 5 running processes on my Mac right now. And no surprise, GoToMeeting #1 and Chrome 2 and 3. So if you have some PowerShell scripts in your library and you want to give them a shot, try them out on the Macs that you are either working on right now or the ones that you're managing. The easiest way to do that is to use Homebrew to install PowerShell. The next thing that we're going to do is take a look at actually deploying and running these scripts through RMM on the machines that you are managing. And so as we said before, all of this will support multiple scripting languages, Python, PowerShell, in addition to Bash. There is a library of scripts and automation policies for you to check out on success.enable.com, and that's the automation cookbook at this link. And with those, generally what you would do is download them to your machine, modify them with your own customizations, add whatever is necessary to make them work in your environment, and then when you deploy them, you can fill in variables and parameters within RMM to make them work for you. Okay, so this is firing up now. Okay, so I have here my little demo lab with a couple of Macs installed. So on this Mac Mini here, you can see that I have my various checks and tasks all set up. So what I'm going to do is run I'm going to deploy a script that I have here in the script manager, same place that you would go on the Windows side for doing automation manager, only instead of running automation manager, which I can't do because it's a Windows executable. Instead, I will be able to upload my scripts. So I'm going to grab and upload this installer here. So what this script does, I'll show you that in just a minute, is going to download and install a package from this URL. So that's easy enough. I will take and I'll call this installer demo installs from a URL. And I'm going to make this something that I can do just as an automated task. It runs on the Mac. And then I'm going to upload it through here. Since I seem to have lost my connection. Okay. So now I have that. Of course, once I wait just a second too long in my script manager, I should be able to see, yes, I have the installer demo script, which is a bash script, and I can view the code. I can actually download the file myself. I can edit the parameters and things here, or I can go to this machine and set it up as an automated task to run my script. And so the script that I have, the script that I have is called installer demo, and it's going to run. And I'm only going to run it manually and give it an hour to run if I need to, but I don't think it will. So now I have this task set here waiting to run when I tell it to. So I could also set it up as an automated task to happen, once a day or once an hour. If I wanted to make it a regular check, I can add it as a script check and that sort of thing. So this is just the generic way of building out, taking a script that you wrote yourself or downloaded from the automation cookbook and deploying it to, in this case, one Mac, but it's just as easy to create that task or that check and then deploy it to all the Macs that you manage. So let's see here. And yes, so to answer your question, Ben, if you were going to deploy PowerShell scripts to the Macs, you will need to install PowerShell on those Macs. Otherwise, I don't think this one has PowerShell installed on it. So if I were to run, try and run pwsh and then a bunch of commands, it would just give me a whole bunch of errors and not know what to do. So just like with Python or anything else, if you want to run a script in a particular language on those remote machines, you need to install the interpreter for that language itself. With most things, you will need to have at least the runtime version of that language installed. So good question, thank you, Ben. So what did I just install? The installer that I have in my demo here is set to download a file, again with curl, which is the URL downloader, and it is set to save the file here in this path /temp/Monterey blocker, and the URL that it is getting is this monster here from GitHub, and it is a package file, PKG, called Monterey blocker. The reason that I use that as a demo is that Monterey, the latest version of macOS, just came out just a couple of weeks ago, and so it is it's still not 100% verified to work with everything, especially from third parties. The compatibility chart is slowly filling up with green, but it's one of those things that I always wait until at least a couple of revisions before I let anyone that I manage download and install the latest version. So the open source community has so considerately created something called Monterey blocker, and this user on GitHub has updated the Big Sur blocker that was there before to create the Monterey blocker package. So what this line here is downloading that into the temp folder. And then once it's downloaded, it will run the installer command. And the installer command takes two parameters. One is the package to install, and the other is where to install it, and that is to the root of the file system or slash. So what is this up here? Again, it's a little obscure, but what I'm looking for here with this if statement is the exit code from the previous command that I ran. So the curl command, if it has errors, the exit code that comes out of it will be something like, like a 404. File not found kind of error. But if it does not have any errors and it works without problems, the exit code will be 0. So what I'm looking for is that exit code. And you can get that with the parameter expansion $sign again. So I'm going to put my screen here. And so if I run any command on the shell, like ls, so I'm listing files that did not have any errors. So if I then have a look at the exit code for that, so the $sign is expanding this parameter. The question mark is, the output from the last command. So that is a 0. So no errors, completed successfully. And if I give it some gobbledygook and do the same thing, the error code is not 0. So it's 127. Basically means I have no idea what you just typed there. So with that, we can very easily do an error check on whether this command completed successfully or not. So if that error, if that exit code is 0, that means success, then I can go on to the next step and install it. And then if it was not successful, so if the exit code was anything other than 0, I'm going to exit my own script with an exit code of anything other than 0 will come back as an error. So in this case, just 1111. So I can look for that in my log files. I can look for that in RMM. I can see it as a failed script check. So in this case, I was looking to see if this machine needed to run some preparations for upgrading to Big Sur. So the error came back, and the error came back. Okay, so and the error message that I pushed to the log was the script is only necessary for versions of macOS prior to Big Sur. So the exit code here was something other than 0, and so it came back as a failure. And the output at the end of the script was my message for the log files. So that was a task that failed, and so I can then find out why it failed right here in RMM. And the way to do that, again, is just as easy as putting an exit code in your bash script. So one of the things that you can do as a bit of homework is, where's PowerShell here? We can skip this lab for right now, but if you are interested in using Installator as in addition to something like Brave or the Run Managed patch on RMM for Macs, Installator is similar to Chocolatey. If you're familiar with Chocolatey on the Windows side, it does it grabs the installers from a variety of resources and gives you a one-line command to install them and update them, keep them updated. It's not 100% necessary since we have the managed patch on RMM for Macs, but it is a handy way to install things rather than having to create your own scripts for downloading and installing. For instance, like the example I use in the lab manual is Brave, which is a web browser that's focused on privacy, and, ad blocking and that sort of thing. So have a look in the lab manual at Installator if you are interested, and the kinds of things that it can install for you. It may not be as extensive as Chocolatey is on the Windows side, but there's 351 as of right now. So everything from the latest version of 1Password, you can use it to update your Dropbox, Google Apps, JetBrains, all the Microsoft apps, all of these things, all the way down to the Zulu Java Development Kit and Zoom Rooms. So have a look at that if you're interested in doing automated installs with bash scripts. But that, as I said, I will leave to you as homework. So scripting just by itself is not necessarily automation. It can be a real time saver, but if you're still having to click to run them or trigger events, it's like you're driving but using cruise control. Myself, I would much rather relax and let the car drive itself, at least along the boring stretches of highway, and just have it wake me up when things get interesting. So with the RMM, the agent itself quietly sitting in the background, just chugging away, it can run your scripts for you on a schedule or as an automated task when something happens, or you can use a script to check on the machine status and give you an alert if it fails. Better yet, if the failed check could trigger another task that fixes the error that happened in the first one, well, then the machine fixes itself and you get to take all the credit. So let's take a look at that RMM checks again. So I have a script that I have written in the script manager. Yeah, there we go. And all it does is checks to see if the current user is in the administrator group or not. And the source for that is here. So once again, get the shebang, setting the variable for the logged in user. And in this case, I am checking to see who the owner of this sort of virtual device file is. And with all things Unix, everything is basically everything about the computer is represented as an object in the file system. For good or for ill, you can have a look at the current logged in user at dev/console, and you can see that that user or that virtual file is owned by me. My main group ID is staff, and I've been logged in since November 8th. So probably need to reboot at some point, but everything's going okay right now, and I don't have any updates that are waiting for me. So with that, I can tell that there is a user logged in and who it is. So I have that in the variable logged in user. And then the next thing I'm going to do is use the directory services command, which is dscl, to read the directory services database, which is sort of like LDAP or Active Directory as far as being able to look for look up users and groups and permissions and that sort of thing. So the directory services command is dscl. And if I do a read on the admin group, I should be able to see who is in the admin group. And still don't know why I'm listed here, 100 times, but I'm listed in there, so that's great. It also gives me a whole bunch of information about UIDs, the group number, the name of the administrators, and so on. But what I really want to do is know if I am in this group membership line. So if I wanted to do a search on something, I use the command grep. And if someone can tell me why it's called grep, that would be really helpful, because all I can think of is grok, but that's not exactly the same, and it's not even a thing. So anyhow, so the grep command will return from a big long list of files or a list of anything, from a text file or what have you, the lines that contain your search term. So again, I'm going to take the output from this command, which is all of this, and I'm going to run it through grep. And let's say I look for the term name. So it's going to be case sensitive. So it's going to return from all of that. It's going to return back to me the lines that contain the word name that I put in the grep command. So what I'm going to do is return the line that contains group membership. And this is one long line, just wrapped a bunch of times because it's super long. And so what that does is that gives me another list that I can do a search through with grep. So I'm going to take the results of this first line here. I'm going to output them into another version of grep, which is basically just the same command, but with some parameters turned on. And I'm going to look for my name, which is the current logged in user. So if that exists in this list, then the user is an administrator and is allowed to be logged in. Maybe you're setting this to run after hours. Maybe you're setting this to run over the weekend, or on a machine that you know that nobody is supposed to be logged into unless they are an admin. And oh, thank you, Jared. grep is global regular expression printing. So helpful. Thank you, whoever wrote grep in the first place. I think they just liked the name and the sound that it made. Anyhow, so I knew it had something to do with regular expressions, but thank you, sir. The if command here, or the if statement, is true, then the user is an admin. And if not, then the logged in user is not an admin. And so again, I'm going to give it an exit code. And maybe my action here is to force the user to log out when it gets an error. So to do that, back here in RMM, if I've got my check here set to do a script check, and I've got my is the user an admin script. And so if I do, there we go. So I'm going to assign a task when the check runs if it fails. So this is going to run. And then if it fails, it is going to add a task to log out the current user. So if the current user is not an admin, I'm going to force them to log out, and I'm gonna, log out user. So that will run as a script check. And when it does, if the user that's logged in is not in that admin list, I'll get an error, and then that error will trigger the task of logging out the currently logged in user. So looks like I had a couple of questions about that. So again, thank you, Jared, for looking up what grep actually means. I appreciate that. Brian, I will be starting to do Mac office hours in the near future. I'll have to check and see what the actual schedule for that is, but I know there will be office hours coming up on my schedule because I had to make sure that I was not out of town for them. And Ari, you were asking about the difference between a script check and an automated task. So if you go to the script manager and you create a new, upload a new script, basically this is telling RMM which library you can put your script into. If it's something that you might use anytime or might use repeatedly, I go ahead and put it in both. Really, what it does is it just makes it available in the two places in the interface. And if I'll go back here to my checks. So if a script check fails, so it can be a repeated check that happens multiple times a day, or happens once a day, whatever your daily checks are running. If that script check fails, then you can get an alert here in your dashboard, or your machine would turn red and you get a little red check over here. In addition to that, a failed check can then trigger a task. When a task fails, you'll get a notification here, and you'll get the notifications for tasks failing, but an automated task just in and of itself cannot then trigger something else on a failure. Only a check can do that. A task will show up, pass or fail in your reporting and in your dashboard. But if you want something to happen as a result of your task, either completing or not completing, then that's when you would build it into the task itself. So in this case, what I'm doing this as a script check, and then the script check is then triggering an automated task. But if I wanted to, I could use this same script with and set it up as a task that runs just once a day or what have you. But I would need to put the actions that I want to do here in the script itself. So does that clear things up? So that's the gist of it. Is really more like what priority things are when you're doing reporting. I tend to use the automated tasks as a way of doing something mostly manually, or if I know that it's going to run, it's only going to run less often than once a day. So if I'm doing a check that I need, needs to happen at a particular time each day, then I'll set it up as a check instead. So we'll get back to the next phase of our boot camp here is to configure all the things. So while there's a lot that you can do with the actions that your scripts can take, you can automate things, automatic repairs, do the self-healing checks like I just showed. Much of what you're going to end up doing, at least, and especially with new customers and new onboarding, is making configuration changes. So what is the time zone and the DNS and things like that. If you can do it within the application or system preferences, so if you can do something in like the preferences pane for the Finder, for instance, or in the system preferences, by checking a box, turning things on and off, all of these are accessible through the command line. So if you can make these changes from the command line, that means you can connect to the machine with your terminal and make changes, test the results without having to kick the user off their computer for a few minutes while you find your way through to the network control panel and check the proxy box and things like that. As far as the preferred proper process for preparing a permanent and persistent preference, those are done with a profile, and I'll go over that briefly in a little bit. Profiles and setting them up and configuring them are a topic that we could easily spend a couple more hours on by themselves. and I am working on a future boot camp specifically for profiles and managing them, so keep an eye out for that in the future. As far as making things like temporary changes, testing something for troubleshooting, or even just setting up the default for a one-off case that you don't necessarily want to go through setting up profiles, there are a handful of commands that you will probably become familiar with that modify p-lists or preference lists, or sorry, not preference lists, property lists, which are just XML files. And you can modify them, and they generally contain key and value pairs. So the XML schema for the specific keys is a little obscure, and sometimes the files themselves are compressed or encrypted or obfuscated in some way. The best friend that you have in managing them is an application called plist buddy. The other way, sort of a shortcut to accessing the specific keys within those property lists, is the defaults command. So I'll show you that here in just a second. To use the defaults command, you're going to need to know what keys you want to change and what values are allowed in that key. So that as a database would be just massive from the standpoint of Apple publishing it. It would just be constantly changing and updating, and every third-party vendor would have their own, and it's really difficult to find the specific thing that you want to change. But luckily, there are resources out there that do much of that for you, and those are included in the links that I gave you at in the lab manual. I mentioned the defaults command. There's also the system setup command, which sort of does what it says on the tin as far as setting up the system, and that does require admin privileges. So I do sudo system setup. So I can do, these are the commands that are available in system setup. It's not super extensive, but it is things like getting and setting the time and date, the current time zone, whether or not the machine can wake on network access, the time for, I think it does the screensaver as well. But these kinds of things that are all generally hardware related, or can get reset when the machine is powered off for a long time, that sort of thing. So that's the system setup command. There we go. The other one, the main one that you're going to find instructions for if you go searching around the web, is the defaults command. And defaults uses what are called domains to manage the different preferences that it can modify. And so this is the list of all the domains that defaults knows about on my computer. And they're in I forget the name of the format, but it's basically reverse DNS format. So it's com.apple.notes is the preferences for the notes application. com.apple.fontbook is the preferences for the fonts that I have. So Apple Media Services, Spotlight, all those kinds of things. A little Easter egg for those of you that are following along at home is if I take that domains listing and pipe it through sed, which is a string editor or a stream editor, and I'm going to do, with sed, I'm going to do a search and replace. I'm going to search for the commas and replace them with the new line character, which, because it's \n, I need to escape the backslash with another backslash. And I'm going to do that as a global search and replace. And so now I have my list in a much more digestible format. So just a little nugget for those of you following along at home. And to give you some idea of what you can find within these preferences files. So I'm going to use defaults to read the domain of com.apple.finder. And so this is the XML that the Finder reads whenever it does something to see what the preferences are for things like whether or not to show the hard drive on the desktop. So with that box checked, you see my hard drive icon appears on the desktop. And if I uncheck the box, now that icon is gone. So to do that with the defaults command, and it's this. So instead of reading the defaults, I'm going to write to the Finder preferences, and the key value, or the key, is going to be called show hard drives on desktop. Seems straightforward enough. And it takes a Boolean value, and in this case, I'm going to set it to false. And so if I go to the desktop, it probably already was false, so that's fine. Let me set that back to true. So you will see my icon on the desktop. Oh, but you won't. Why is that? And that is because the Finder and most other applications that you find on the Mac are going to require either some sort of notification or quit and restart before they recognize that that preference file has changed. So what I'll do then is kill the Finder, and now that it has restarted by itself automatically, should see that my icon is back there on the desktop. And that is a matter of writing that defaults and then restarting the Finder. So if you do something that should modify the way the system behaves or an application looks, things like that, with by modifying the preferences with defaults, you may need to quit and relaunch the application itself before that preference is recognized. So just a word of warning. So your next lab is in your lab manual, and your task is to use the defaults command to change some of your system preferences in the way that you like them. And if you want, you can then take those and build them into a script that automates setting those particular settings on your remote Macs. So Ben was asking about where to get things like the, it's not in there, show hard drives on desktop key. And in your lab manual, at the end, you should see a list of links. And let's see if I can find the one that, yeah. So for instance, this reference here is a lot of the things that I've actually done today, things like installing Homebrew and Git and all those sorts of things. But the preferences for defaults, a lot of times you'll find listings like this in reference to, so in the references for various configurations that people have found handy or helpful, or very often if you go to, for instance, GitHub and do a search for defaults, right? There's a whole bunch of repositories that include things like, here is someone's recommendations for the different kinds of things that they prefer to have on their machine. And I keep looking for a sort of a global reference from Apple about, where is database or listing of what does what in all of the Apple apps, but there's not one even in the developer documentation. There's not one that's complete. There are some that are incomplete, and various third parties have put together the preferences settings for their own apps, but there's nothing that's all in one place. So if somebody wants a project, they can do that and maintain it, and that'll be sort of your lifetime goals. I will show you very briefly how to use profiles in RMM for modifying those same preferences and making them more persistent. So here I have an application called Profile Creator. It's a free app. There's several that are like this. There's also one on Windows from a company called iMazing, I think. And if you look at the profiles that this generates, they're just XML under the hood. So it's all just XML all the way down. But if you want to create the actual profiles with something that's a little bit more intelligible, what you would do is open up, for instance, Profile Creator, and go into, let's say, the Safari profiles, and let's turn on security. Here we go. So we're going to disable plugins and Java and JavaScript, and yeah, so that will make Safari pretty much useless on the modern web, but it will also protect you from getting nasty things from things like Flash plugins and random stuff like that. So if I wanted to make this part of the profile for my client machines, I'll just add that as the payload, and then in here I can determine whether I want it to be for every user on the system or just for the user that installs it. And then I can give it, name and description and metadata from where, so where it came from, so that when you open it up in the profiles preferences pane, you'll see, that it's from your MSP and not from Apple and that kind of thing. The other thing that you can do is allow the user to remove the profile or not. Oh, what's going on? Profile Creator. Okay. So this prevents the user from removing that profile themselves, and basically requires you as the admin to make changes to it. So that way you can do things like adding in your security preferences, whether or not File Vault is turned on, and basically enforce them that way through a profile. So once I've created the profile, I can go in here and export it, and it creates this .mobile config folder, mobile config file. You set up your metadata there, and I'm not going to go through all of that right now, but suffice to say, now I have that mobile config file somewhere that I can upload it to RMM. And with the Macs that I have under management, I have them enrolled in Apple Device Management here, which, if you haven't set it up yet for your Macs, it is a matter of creating a certificate here in the Apple Device Management pane. And this walks you through creating and updating that certificate from Apple, uploading it to your server, and then the machines that RMM has an agent on will then ask the user for permission and install that certificate on those machines. Once that is done, then you have access to your library of profiles. And I've uploaded one here as my demo profile. And now that it's there in my library, I can deploy it. So much like going into the script script manager and uploading a script into your library and then applying it to different machines. So now I have this Mac Mini here, and it currently has one profile installed. So I can remove that profile once it talks to the Mini. There we go. So I'm going to remove that one. And then if I wanted to install one, I would select the machines that I want to install it on, and then install those profiles. And then I'll select the profile that I want to install and just hit install on it. So when that process is done, essentially the preferences or the settings that I've set in that profile are now the default and also persistent across that machine. I can still remove them or change them if I didn't set them to be non-user removable. So if you're doing things like compliance for security purposes, file encryption or disk encryption rather, things that you don't want the user to be able to turn off or things that you don't want the user to be able to turn on, profiles are the way to go. But it does require this additional step of enrolling in Apple Device Management. And I will be doing another presentation just on profiles in webinar coming up soon, so keep an eye out for that if that's something that you are planning on doing, especially for those of you that do have the 50 to 100 level of Macs that you're managing. Question from Jared: is there a difference between using Profile Creator and Apple Configurator? Profile Creator is, I think it's a little bit friendlier than the Configurator. Obviously, Configurator, it comes from Apple and it's a little bit more integrated as far as what you can send things directly from that to a device as opposed to going through the RMM as an intermediary. But in the end, if you're creating the mobile config file the way you want it to, there's really no difference because you're getting that file, that XML file out the other end that's in the right format, and it has the right it has the right keys in all the right places. So if you already have a configurator and you use it for managing profiles on your Macs, you can continue to use it. There's no real functional difference between that and Profile Creator. I just happen to prefer the interface on this and the way that it outputs the files is a little bit more accessible, at least to me. So hope that answers your question, Jared. Is that right? And if you haven't already, go through the process of creating an Apple push certificate and enrolling your Macs in that so that you have the ability to then push profiles to them that way. And finally, so these resources, these links are all going to be in the lab manual as well, but I thought I would put them here so you can have a chance to screenshot. The community for Mac admins on Slack is a great one. It's very active and really accessible. You don't feel bad about being new to managing Macs, or even if you've been doing it for a long time and you only have 5 or 10 that you're managing. If you have questions, the people at Mac admins are usually happy to oblige. And when it comes to automation, the channel, there's a channel there for scripting, but there's also one specifically for shell scripting, which is Bash. And the people there, like honestly, some of the things that come out of that channel as as scripts are remarkable as far as what they can manage to do with the command line. So scripting OS 10, as far as references go, the books that come from Sal and the other authors there at scripting are they're references that that I keep open and have bookmarked. Pretty much refer to them every day as far as what's the syntax for doing that replacement, or this this regular expression, that sort of thing. So before I get to the Q&A, if you have any questions, please feel free to go ahead and put them in there. I am going to ask you 2 more questions. So a quick poll: would you be interested in joining a Mac-focused partner advisory group. So Enable does have these PAGs, PAGs for all of our products and different things. And it's a great way to get sort of direct contact with the people that are developing and marketing, and you can have sort of a direct Q&A with people that are putting things on the roadmap and prioritizing things. So we get together, I think, once a quarter, and it's all virtual right now, with the exception of when we have a big event somewhere, like if we're at a conference, we might have sort of mini PAG in person, and they're great. So I'm starting up a Mac PAG. So if you're interested, please please indicate yes in the poll, and if you're not, then just indicate no. And if you indicate yes, then I will add you to the invite list once the PAG opens up. So looks like just about everyone has voted there, so I will close that off. All right. Well, thank you all for attending, and I hope you have a good afternoon if you are relatively close in time zone to me. Otherwise, have a good day or evening or whatever it is. Time zones are always confusing to me. With that, I will leave you and say thank you, and have a great day.